No, I started wearing earplugs to shows way too late in the game.
Me too.
It's a critical thing, honestly.
Yeah, I think it was for me. What did it was when we were doing in my new role, doing the one that I'm in now after years of being in the music industry, doing a business. It was kind of like a business grand opening, but it was a new owner taking over from folks who had retired. And it was a hearing place. And they said, we got talking about being in the music industry all these years, and I'm pretty sure I've got some hearing loss. They said, well, it doesn't cost anything to get your hearing tested. At least get a baseline. Then, sure. As you get older, then you can see how it might change over time. So, yeah, sure enough. Right around
scary to know, I think.
Yeah, especially. But, it validated a few things. The loss was in that 3 to 4, maybe 5,000 hertz range, which is... yeah, where the guitar amps and crash cymbals hit hardest. Right. So I can always validate now using science that I always said those guitar amps are the bane of my existence. So
right.
Now I've got the proof.
All right. So we're here today with Derek Giberson, City Councillor of Oshawa for Ward 4.
That's right.
Ward 4.
Yeah.
And very likely going to be the next mayor of Oshawa. So very glad to have you here. How's it going?
All right. You sort of, with every election cycle, you have to do the sort of faded transition from the city councillor role to the election period. Right. And the one saving grace is that, the summer break is upon us. So it gives you a little bit of a moment to catch your breath, and then you start switching gears, and that's sort of where we are right now. We're in that transition mode.
So, how does the city council actually function during an election? Is it just we're shut down because everyone's doing this other thing, or is there like some sort of emergency meeting schedule that's going on?
So there's a little bit that still happens, and it can change from one municipality to the other based on how they do their committee and council schedules, but in our case, Oshawa has always taken a break for summer, basically identical to the public school timing, same thing, July and August, and it's sort of up to each municipality to decide that piece of it. But there is one spot that is very clear in legislation in the Municipal Act, and in the as it ties into municipal elections, that once you get to what they call the closing of nominations day, so Ontario-wide for all municipalities, that's this year it's August the 21st. Everything after that is what sometimes gets informally referred to as the lame duck period, but really it's in the more formal sense. The legislation puts limits on what you can actually do. So you do still meet. We got one more round in September of committees, then council meeting at the end of the month. But you can't make any of the big decisions during that last period while that we'll call it that election period is open at that point. Yeah.
Okay. So what are you expecting to be different about running for mayor versus city councillor in the past?
Geography, that's for sure, yeah. Although I will say, the first time I ever ran was back in 2014. And in 2010 and 2014, Oshawa did what I'll call a little bit of an experiment, or they did this switch where they, after a bunch of years of being a ward-based system for the councillors, which we are currently since 2018, but there was 2 cycles, 2010, 2014, where they went back to something that they had many decades ago, which is the at-large system. All of the candidates run all across the city, and then you have to be, somewhere in the top, whatever, 3 or 7, depending on which race you're running for. And so that was actually my first taste of running cross city. Now the city population has grown since then, and the big substantial difference is that the mayoral race is the one that people tend to focus on.
Right.
You tend to get when you're running in the councillor races and the council seat races, you tend to get the scraps in terms of people's attention.
Well, it's sort of like in the federal elections, how you're voting for your local MP, but you're kind of thinking about the prime ministers.
And you know what? The research bears that out, that the decision-making, we'll call it rubric that voters use in those provincial and federal elections, it's party, party leader, and then local representative, sometimes with a flip around of party leader to party, but those two are always the strong front runners in how people make their choice. No matter how much people say, you really should make sure also that you take a good look at the candidates.
Well, then,
The
but the
majority
candidates don't tend to release very much personal kind of campaign content.
Yeah, a little bit of color just so you kind of know who they are, but at the end of the day...
They're not exactly hosting debates for every single riding across Canada.
And
right?
some of them, just by nature of population, distribution, all that sort of stuff, that's a factor too. But, the candidates themselves, they're going to be talking about the party platform. Right? In municipal politics, at least in most provinces, we don't have political parties. So people actually have to sift through based on what they can find about each candidate and make their choices. That one, name recognition tends to be a big driver for sure.
There you go.
And and they don't really have the party leader or party to help them make the choice.
Because I think there's some pros and cons to that, right? Because on one hand, you get to make your decisions based on what you think is right, as opposed to what the team wants to do.
Yeah.
But then you don't have the same kind of resources as the Liberal Party of Canada
100%.
for your marketing. So you're not going to be able to reach as many people
100%.
directly, right?
100%. Yeah. And you know what? That's a part that maybe people don't see as much, or, until you point it out, it makes sense once you point it out, I guess. But that's, yeah. So, I mean, the point that you made about the resources that parties have during the campaign period, that's a big piece around like how campaigns actually work in that context versus in that local and municipal context. Right. And it's also true between elections as well. So sometimes people will ask me to, they'll say, hey, can your administrative assistant or your communications person get in touch with me about such and such, or I'll pick up my office phone if it rings. I happen to be there, and sometimes the biggest surprise in that person's voice is that it's
you.
It's me,
Yeah.
right? This is the person that actually picked up that phone. Historically, a city councillor role, that changes when you get into much larger cities, but it historically was presumed to be a part-time role. Part of the assumption that always came with it was that there may be other work that person does. And quite often that is still the case. In many municipalities, including in Oshawa, you'll often see that to be the case. If someone sits on both the city and the regional council, because we got this 2-tier system of government here, at that point, you may want to think twice about how many other outside commitments you have. But that certainly is the case for many who just sit on that local level of government.
So, in your experience, do you you see this as a full-time job, what you're doing, or is there enough space to kind of have other stuff going on the side? Is it fair to do the job in that situation?
These are, I mean, you're touching on these questions that are going, these conversations are going on right now in the municipal sector in a very fulsome way. And, if you were to ever step into any dialogues going on with like our provincial association of municipalities, or go to their conferences or read some of the things that they put out there, that's become a big question. Like, does the expectations match the reality? Does the pay match the quantity of work you have to do? Plus, on top of it, like you lose your private citizen status, right? So if I'm just in the grocery store to I need to just buy bananas and eggs or something like that, I may discover that I'm actually on the clock. Somebody may come up to me and want to have a conversation. So, there's pieces like that. And, I'll add to that. Like 8 years ago when I started in this role, the local media landscape was significantly different than what it is today. 8 years ago, if I was in a council meeting and I said something that was ridiculous or brilliant or, salient to the conversation, or was off topic to the conversation, and, any imaginable thing that was quoted in media, or, sometimes media would report, your voting record, your attendance record. Well, that's 8 years ago. Fast forward now, most of that local media has either significantly contracted or in some cases don't even exist, right? So now you have to put in extra time to get your message out there, your voice out there it used to be that you had a local independent press that would do that. So now there's more expectations on you, but the resources, the pay, et cetera, and all the other responsibilities haven't shifted to match that changing reality. And I mean, if you look at, we were talking about provincial and federal politicians, they typically have like someone that takes care of their social media.
There's a team,
yeah,
right?
There's someone picking up the phone when you get those constituency calls about, my garbage didn't get picked up, or my passport needs renewing, or whatever level of government you're trying to find and reach out to. Usually you don't get the MP on the line.
Right.
You get an office, an office employee that helps with that sort of stuff at that very local tier. It's, unless you're in a much bigger city, you don't tend to have that types of very direct support for you individually as one councillor.
So something you touched on with like the changing media landscape and needing to sort of do your own publicity, because that's one thing when you're talking about getting positive messaging about yourself out. But what happens when you're upset with actions that another city councillor are taking, for example, right? Because you don't want to be the guy going on your social media talking about, oh, this bastard and he voted for this. But like, people may not hear about it.
It's true, yeah. And it's one of, I think it's one of my, I'll say observations, maybe also frustrations to a degree, as far as that changed landscape where, the fundamental question is, how do people get information about what their elected representatives are doing and not doing, and what they're saying and what they're not saying. And it's also one of those dynamics of being a nonpartisan environment in municipal government, because when you are, again, at those other levels of government, provincial, federal, if you are part of the official opposition, His Majesty's official opposition, your job is to oppose. Your job is to critique what the government side is doing. If you weren't critiquing, you would be considered to not be doing your job.
Yeah.
On the other hand, with the municipal council structure, it makes for a more mixed reality, and a lesser known fact, the municipal government structure that we've inherited in Canada came over from Britain, and it is actually, in fact, historically, the board of directors of the municipal corporation. And, one of the dynamics of being on a board of directors with a group of people is that you have to choose how adversarial you want to make the temperature, right? And that sort of flow chart in your head, trying to make those choices. Okay, well, if I do say this, how will that affect that next decision or that next meeting, where you may be looking at a whole different set of fault lines in terms of who may be voting on which thing and who are you trying to win over. So it definitely changes the dynamic for sure. And I think that what any hopefully more mature member of a municipal council should be doing is, you go through this debate, you settle it, it lands on the vote that it does, you push reset for the next one. Doesn't always work out that way. And it does also, again, come back to the question, what should the public know? Post-event, post-decision. And also with social media, every politician now has the opportunity to put their own bias and spin on how they represent what happened that day. Right.
Well, and because I can go and read the meeting minutes, right? I don't know that tells the full story.
No, it sure doesn't.
Right?
Yeah.
And then trying to go to 5 different politicians' social media pages to try and track an issue. You could go to the city's website and read through whatever documentation is formally being released. I feel like none of this gives you an adequate view of really what's going on.
Yeah. The only way you could do it, to be perfectly honest,
is to be a city councilor.
Yeah, be a city councilor, or sit in the room for every meeting, or watch the video of every meeting. I don't know that most people have time to sit through hours and hours of committee meetings.
Well, we're back to the same thing about how it's a full-time job for you doing it, right?
Well, our council meeting this week, it was the last regularly scheduled one before the summer break. We have one more special one for a singular item, but the regular one, we wrapped up, let's see if I can recall the time. It was mid-afternoon. Anyways, we started at 9:30, and it was sometime mid-afternoon whenever we finally wrapped up. So I don't know. Most people don't have 5 hours to sit and watch the whole video.
Yeah.
There's also nuances that the more exposure to it, you start to catch particular things that you
Well,
might...
there's things that you're not saying out loud.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, that's the stuff that takes a long time watching to start to catch the dynamics that might be just out of the surface.
Right. So can I ask you, like, what's an example of a time that you disagreed with a colleague?
Oh, wow. Lots of those.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, how do you handle it when you do?
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes you need to put out a public message, but you can't be trashing someone you're going to work with.
For sure.
Day, right?
And I mean, there are also, you know, in terms of how colorful you want to be in describing the decision or words of other members of council, there are some guardrails, I'll say. Like, we do have a code of conduct. Sure. So I can certainly, you know, go on Facebook and say that I passionately disagree with the position that my council colleague so-and-so took on this today, and I hope that as residents who share equal concern on this issue, that you'll get in touch with them and let them know how you feel about it. That's allowed. If I were to get on social media and say that my council colleague took this position on this thing, and I think that they're an idiot, they're a moron, they are not fit for office, and people should seriously consider accosting them in the supermarket, I think that's probably going to get a call to the Integrity Commissioner and probably a finding of a code of conduct violation by the Integrity Commissioner, and rightly so. We can have spirited debates, but we need to maintain a certain bar of decency all throughout that, and that's very doable. And I think one great Oshawa historic figure that knew how to have spirited debates, but still maintained that I guess decorum, whatever you want to call it, was Ed Broadbent, longtime MP for Oshawa, also the leader of the federal NDP for many years. It was old school. I mean, they could really get into it, but they maintained that parliamentary decorum. In terms of particular instances that you ask about, let me see if I can think of one that's most recent. I definitely have some very mixed feelings about some of the land sales that we have been doing of municipal properties, especially in the downtown. I would put it this way: I would do it differently. I would be looking to leverage that this isn't my brilliant idea. This is not based on the principle of don't reinvent the wheel. There are municipalities across Canada right now that, in response to the housing affordability crisis, one of the ways that they're getting involved is that they're looking at some of that excess municipal land that may be, or surplus, I guess is the term we use, legislative term, and looking at it and saying maybe some of this can be leveraged for affordable housing. And I don't entirely agree with the consensus on council, or the majority on council, that has preferred to put that out to the broader market, see what comes in, and if it looks good based on some sort of set of criteria, go with whichever one scores highest. I have always believed that what we should be doing in any instances of municipal surplus lands, seeing as we hold all the leverage in that situation, is put really, really clear requirements. Like, put it in numbers, put it in percentages in terms of what needs to happen for affordability, number of units, what affordability actually looks like in terms of the numbers, and then put that out there as the way of deciding who to work with on those. That's one where I've landed very different from many of my council colleagues on those types of decisions.
So, and basically the principle of what you're talking about is building more, say, apartment buildings, condos, stuff like that, to drive down or drive up the supply so you can lower pricing, correct?
Partially, yeah. I mean, supply is one piece of the equation for sure. We had we had quite a supply crunch going on there for several years. The federal government changed some of the targets on numbers of international, both workers and students. So that has eased some of that pressure off of it, but it hasn't actually created an environment of truly affordable housing. And one of the things that is also going on at the same time, and there's a really great researcher in Canada who's semi-retired now, a guy named Steve Pomeroy, and several years back, I remember him releasing a research study that he led that showed that in the Canadian housing economy as a whole, where we had, for every one affordable unit getting built, 11 more were going out the back door. 11 affordable units were going out the back door. And what that meant, that research discovered, was that, sure, we were starting to build some, affordable units and, like nonprofit, co-op, publicly owned, things like that. But these 11 going out the back door, so to speak, was the sales that were going on. So these sales of, maybe you've got a family-owned mid-sized apartment, and they're deciding it's, time to retire, as it were, and they sell it to these real estate investment trusts, for instance, that then might renovict or do things to push the rent up. So that's those 11 going out the so-called back door, right? And finding those solutions at that municipal level, we don't have as many of the tools as the provincial and federal governments do, but we do have some. And, I think that part of our role is to figure out which ones are they, which tools are available, and then put as much energy as possible into the ones that we could do best at.
So what does the interface between municipal government and the other levels of government look like when you're talking about an issue that spans across municipal, provincial, federal? So
I would say that if we were to measure the total amount of interface between those levels of government, municipal, provincial is the most it's the one with the most interfacing, we'll just say. Sure. So, and part of that is just because of how the Constitution is written. So municipalities, we don't even exist in the Constitution. There's this saying that you'll hear in municipal circles in Canada, that municipalities are creatures of the province. And it's sort of a way of saying, stay in your lane. Don't get too excitable, because at the end of the day, you don't actually have any like constitutionally entrenched rights or anything like that. And the province basically decides how things are going to work, what you do and get to do, and what you don't get to do, and that's sort of that. It's always a little more complicated than that, but that gives you a bit of an idea. And so, in the municipal to federal relationship, primarily, I would say the biggest relationship between municipal federal is on the funding side. So the federal government, here's another saying in this world of different levels of government in Canada. In Canada, we say that the federal government has all the money, the provincial governments have all the power, and the provincial and the municipal governments have all the problems. We don't have the same, tax raising mechanisms. We're not allowed to invent our own. That's like just completely non-existent for us to say one day, we should implement an additional income tax or something like that. Like, we literally do not have the statutory power to do that. So provincially, that really is where the relationship is most alive. Like, they set the framework for everything that we do. A lot of the services that we operate are ones that are set out in provincial legislation that tells us how to do that, what the service levels are supposed to look like, what we can and can't do, all of that stuff, from wastewater to stormwater to roads, parks, libraries, social services, et cetera, like all of that frontline stuff that is not distinctly provided by the provincial government. So healthcare, public education, those are two of the big ones. It's basically the province that maps all that stuff out and tells us how to do it.
So something you mentioned here that I wanted to kind of loop back to about the city's kind of income. Like, you're not allowed to raise taxes, right?
Well, we have property taxes as our primary.
Okay.
One. Yeah.
No, and it's just like, this is something that seems to be in the perception of the public that I don't know if it's true or not. But it's the parking ticket situation.
Right. Yeah.
No, because it feels sometimes like we sent out 20 MLEOs today to get a bunch of parking tickets, and the city's kind of short on cash, so they needed to do. Is this just a complete crazy thought that you're just grumpy about something, or is there any water to that?
So I guess that you picked either the right or the wrong person to bring up that subject with. So Here is okay. So there are two pieces to the world of parking tickets. So one of them is the connection between revenue and cost. I mean, the revenue to the revenue that comes in from them, and then the cost to actually deliver the staff to do the bylaw work and stuff like that. But really, the part that's underlying that doesn't get talked about quite as much is parking itself. And we sometimes don't realize just how complicated the subject is because it feels so familiar. It feels so common. Like, you drive to the plaza, you park your car, and you run in to get, the convenience store to grab a couple of things. And we don't sit and actually reflect on what is what are the costs tied into this, and where are the costs hidden, and who's paying for what. And a perfect example of that, to take away the sort of the plaza, the private property instance of it, go back onto the public property. So I'm going to step out of downtown for a second here, because that's where the conversation becomes especially relevant, because there is paid parking and how long you can park in certain spots and all that sort of stuff. Step out of that reality as well, and let's just go on to some sort of average or normal suburban neighborhood street. Again, something we don't think much about. Somebody might have friends coming over, they park on the street. Makes sense, I guess. It's free to do that. But there is actually a cost to that. That street or that road, there are servicing costs for that. The life cycle maintenance and, being able to, the upkeep, and they've got to do patching sometimes and things like that. And our biggest asset class in terms of life cycle costs are the physical roads that we have. The piece that's harder to conceptualize is just that everyday user, is that you're getting this thing for free. You're getting, this spot to store your personal property for 10 minutes or an hour or a few hours. If someone were to replace that car with some boxes and some cabinets and a couch, and someone were to come by and say, what the heck is this? You'd say, what do you mean? I thought we were allowed to put our personal effects in this spot along the side of the road. Nobody ever questions it in one context, and in another, it's considered an eyesore if it's there, or it's considered abnormal behavior or something like that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, the cost still exists. It still is paid for out of the property tax base. So figuring out, especially as that space becomes scarcer, or there's more competition for it, so you come into a downtown area, or a more recent and controversial part of the city down at the lake, the whole change around where residents get to park for free and non-residents, they pay $20 for the day or something like that, and residents now have to register their license plate at City Hall so that they don't get a ticket when they're down there. It all comes back to this fundamental question of, are we making these assumptions about this public good that has to be paid for somehow, and maybe in high demand in certain parts of the city especially, and are we actually really trying to break down the constituent parts of why and who pays for what and how much? And I'll give you one example of that. If it was free parking still down at the lake, the sort of last year and before. So if someone were to want to go and enjoy our lakefront, and we got this beautiful lakefront in Oshawa, there are a few different ways you can get there. You can drive in a car, you can jump on public transit, you can ride a bike there, you can walk, depending on, if the distance works for you. In each of those scenarios, there's a different cost to the overall public. If somebody walks or bikes down there, the infrastructure cost, so sidewalks, the paths that go down there, is marginal. It's almost non-existent in the grander scheme of things. If somebody drives their car down there, they're obviously using, again, that road infrastructure. It's not cheap to keep and maintain.
A single stoplight probably costs more than the bike path, right?
So then you got parking down at the lake, which also costs money to maintain. And in that scenario, again, this is when the paid parking got added. In that scenario, you've got one group of people that is, and let's assume all of these three different sets of people are all, roughly equal for the experiment's sake. But if we take that scenario and look at the actual cost that each is getting, the benefit that each is getting, the one that drives their car down there and parks their car for free is getting quite a bit more benefit. Even if all three of those people are paying the same amount in property taxes,
Sure.
there are some that are benefiting more. So this is where it just gets like so convoluted and confusing that people tend to get frustrated and check out of those conversations.
Right. Well, I think it's one of those things that, like, you receive a parking ticket. How are you supposed to be happy about it?
I don't think anyone is.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is. Now, I mean, I've had friends over the years who say, yeah, I played with fate
I was
and
doing something stupid there,
like
right?
I knew I could. I took the risk. It's fine. I got the proper.
I got a parking ticket once while I was walking from my car to the meter.
Wow, that's.
And I got back to like put what the.
That is. I don't know if that's efficient or like really bad luck. I buy a lottery ticket that.
Right. Yeah. No, another thing you had mentioned was this bike path that we have it extends basically from right behind City Hall straight down to the lakefront, right?
Yeah.
I personally really love that thing.
Yeah, me too.
Here's my question. That's just while I've got you here, because there have been a couple of closures along that for several years now.
Yeah.
It's like and trying to find like anything of a timeline when that's going to be fixed is difficult.
Yeah. So that one, and I'm also a frequent user of that route. Really like it. It's a great. Not only is it a great way to get down the lake from City Hall, and usually I leave my bike at my office. It's also, you get a 10 to 15 minute mental health break. Get to ride through the ride
Well,
through
to
the
me,
valley
that's
there,
my
right?
like how I get anywhere. I don't have a car. I just have an electric bike that I use to get around, and that's like the highway of Oshawa.
It is
to me,
truly,
right?
yeah, and it also shows you what happens, when we're so proud about our paths and our, these trail systems. It also shows you what happens when you're over reliant on your self-perception that you've got this great trail system. All it takes is one closure, and suddenly it interrupts the whole flow of movement for those who would get around that way. And we're a bit of we're a little late on the active transportation game in Oshawa. I think that we have to be very honest with ourselves that we have some catching up to do, and that's just one example of it, and especially with all the construction right now. That one's a bit of a tangle because there's a couple of different points that it's closed at right now. The Gibb Street, what used to be the underpass, and they closed that because it was too close to the water based on more modern engineering and technical standards. That part of it is sort of hung up with a 2 layers of government problem because Gibb Street is a regional road, whereas the city is the path system. And until they do the widening and replacement, bridge replacement, all that sort of stuff, that one's kind of in limbo. So you have to kind of do that weird thing where you go by the school and everything. But timeline for the next stretch further down, don't know what the timeline is on that one right now. My other concern too is if you just look at the actual condition of many stretches of the path, there are parts of it that are in a state of significant deterioration.
Right.
And that doesn't exactly invite people to want to keep coming back and using it, and especially using it as an alternative to other forms of transportation, right? Which would get people using those things that are those lower cost options that could maybe ease some of that pressure off of the overall tax base, right? Not very appealing whenever you got to, there's stretches when you're on your bike, and unless you got really great shocks on your bike, you go over it and, you're bouncing the whole way down.
You see, I grew up in the country, not a problem for me.
But yeah, it's familiar. It's nostalgic.
Well, okay, but you imagine like little old lady trying to bike on this.
Absolutely.
Like it's not a reasonable expectation.
100%. I was in Copenhagen some years ago it was actually a study tour to learn more about their great cycling infrastructure, and all ages. Like it's not something that is limited to a particular age, or level of fitness,
right?
Or level of safety aptitude, or how many helmets and pads and reflectors do they wear. It's all about, is the infrastructure safe and usable for people of all ages and abilities. That's the stretch goal. That's where we still have to get to here.
Well, and so then the other kind of point to bring up here is, where does that bike trail begin?
Where does it begin?
In Midtown Mall.
Oh, at this, up
which
at this
is
end,
a problem that you only need to say Midtown Mall to fully explain it, right? And I want to know what your thoughts are on that kind of area of Oshawa.
Do you mean, higher levels of folks who are maybe unsheltered, that kind of thing? Yeah. So I always have to make sure that I preface these conversations by saying I am more familiar with those environments and with folks who are going through those struggles than maybe other people are.
Sure.
I have my own, sort of sense of safety, sense of comfort in environments based on, different experiences maybe than other people have. I spent years on the board at the Backdoor Mission working directly with that population. So some people, they're uncomfortable. They're not quite sure what to expect whenever they travel along a stretch like that. And, it would be too easy for me to just say, you know what, it's fine. You don't need to worry about that. I mean, I guess me saying that might help some people, but it's not going to help everyone, right? And I think that if we see those types of scenes, if we see that there has been this increase, not just in Oshawa, but every city across Canada, right? With this, homelessness, mental health, addictions, these concurrent crises that are going on. What I have always wanted to drive towards is what are the root cause issues there and how do we drive towards the solutions for that? And then we don't even maybe need to get tangled up in that conversation around how does the parent with their child feel going through that particular stretch. I mean, I certainly hope that the parent would try to find some way to teach their child empathy, but I want to be, again, cognizant.
There's also an amount of teach your child, don't talk to strangers.
Right.
Too,
well,
right?
and I definitely grew up in the probably one of the eras that really hammered those lessons home. That maybe the pendulum swung a little too far on that one, and we should learn to talk to strangers. It shouldn't be that weird. It's just about being prudent, right? And
don't talk to strangers in a dark alley.
Yeah,
but at a park, fine.
Yeah, like it's nothing wrong with saying hello to someone when you walk by, right? It's sort of that small town norm where you say hi to people. But I think that those are tough situations, and I don't ever want to presume other people's comfort levels or maybe what they're used to or not used to. But we also know that there are solutions to those sorts of challenges. It's not like we are stuck in this homelessness and mental health and addictions crisis forever, and this is just the reality forever. I sincerely and deeply believe that there are solutions to them. Whether we are doing a good job at every level of government of actually doing the work and putting the resources towards those solutions is a whole other debate. We got work to do that maybe we need to do more of. But I don't believe that this is a solutionless crisis. I don't believe that homeless people have to be homeless forever, that we just keep that cycle going. I think that cycle can be broken. But we got to be willing to put the work in.
So on your first day as mayor, what kind of things would you start doing to address this issue?
So first day as mayor, if they, or let's say sort of the first steps into what sort of solutions that I would like to see. So two things happen when someone like me would be elected mayor, because currently I'm just the city councillor for this ward. I only sit at the local government, the city government. If elected mayor, I would now be on the regional government and the city government. So in both of those forums, what I would be doing is, in a way, fairly simple, and it goes back to what I was saying. There are tools, there are resources, there are approaches that either we are not yet applying or that we have only applied in a limited way. And my work to both advocate and push forward is, let's get on with it. Let's start doing the things we know work. And I'll give you just one example. This is both a compliment and a criticism to the region of Durham. Some years back, they put the 10-unit microhomes pilot project down on Olive Avenue. And, it has had some challenges. Let's be really clear about that. It has not been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it has worked for many of the people that have gone through that program. Housing people who are coming, in most cases, directly off of the street. So that's the compliment. The criticism is, why didn't they scale up? Take what you've got, it works, you've got the model, your people now know how to run it, scale it up, replicate it.
Yeah.
Why stop at 10?
Yeah, 10. Well, there's more than 10 homeless people in the city, right?
Add 10 more, and then add 10 more.
Yeah.
You know, scale up ambitiously, because you know that this is something that works. So I would say that would be a big part of those first steps into the mayor's office is let's just get on with it. We know a lot of the solutions. We don't know every solution, but we know a lot of them. We got to push harder into those ones. And here's why it's especially important. We also know the numbers. We know the dollars. The dollars tell us very, very clearly that the cost to manage homelessness and mental health and addictions, especially on the street, the cost to manage it is way higher than the cost to solve it. In other words, when the 911 call comes in, you deploy several layers of emergency services, the person is taken to the hospital, maybe they spend a day or two or half a day in an acute care bed or longer. Those costs are astronomical compared to the cost of 1 month in Canada. On average, the average cost to house someone in a supportive housing environment, so in other words, it's not just the roof over their head, but they actually have some supports there, is $3,500 a month. The cost to have someone in a hospital is, from the last numbers I saw, was in the, I think it was $38,000 per month to hospitalize someone going through the exact same state, the same crisis. The math just makes sense to say, let's get on top of the things that we know are the most efficient with taxpayer dollars and can just create more solutions for people.
Well, and that's completely disregarding the benefit of, one, you're freeing up a hospital bed.
100%.
And two, you're cleaning up the streets and making downtown more palatable to people, right?
Yeah.
Because that's like really the thing that everyone points to when they criticize downtown Oshawa, right? And I think it's an unfair criticism. It's the same as any other downtown core.
Yeah. I agree that it's an unfair criticism as well, too. And I'm not trying to take away from the fact that people, you know, have different opinions about what they may see when they come through downtown or when they see pictures or portrayals or whatever. I do think sometimes there are some exaggerations in some instances. You know, as a downtown resident, I quite like living downtown. There are some upsides, downsides. That isn't one of the, you know, people being homeless isn't one of the things that, you know, it did not change. Seeing a homeless person on my way over here to have this conversation didn't change the taste of my drink, right?
There you go.
You know, it's this combination of reality perception, trying to figure out which is which. Now, I will say this, when people say, oh, the biggest problem with downtown Oshawa, it's, you know, we got all the homeless and people strung out. So my question then, I follow up that with a question. So if we were to go back, and we know that these numbers were increasing pre-pandemic, the pandemic accelerated that trend. But if we were to go back to, let's pick a number, 2018, when the numbers were not nearly as high as they are now. My question in 2018 was, why is our downtown not performing at the level we want it to in 2018? And if I were to go back to 2012, let's say, I would ask that same question with, again, even fewer people who are homeless and visibly dealing with mental health and addiction. I'd say 2012, why was our downtown underperforming then? And then I'd go back further to 2005 and say, why was our downtown? This has been a common narrative in Oshawa for the better part of actually more than 3 decades. If we go back to the times of the 1990s with the Downtown Action Committee, really great community members and civic-minded volunteers and businesses downtown that said, we want to improve our downtown. And we've had successive versions of that conversation over the years. Got to improve the downtown. We've got to revitalize the downtown. And always with good intention and people rolling their sleeves up and putting good work in. Now, in 2026, the conversation almost immediately swings to, if only we could get rid of those homeless people, our downtown would be revitalized. And I would say, really, because I was around here, someone not just who lives in Oshawa, but as someone who has worked in the music industry for years, which has included many places in Ontario and Canada, but also in downtown Oshawa, and I can tell you that it was underperforming then as well too. There's been this sort of this fluctuation, but never these giant swings up or giant swings down. We've just sort of been in this kind of bobbing trend line in terms of like vacancy rates and business activity and things like that for several decades at this point. And I can't buy the idea that it's because of the homeless people, because it was going on previous to that.
Well, and my take, and tell me if this doesn't match with the numbers you've seen, is it seems to be about GM scaling down operations in Oshawa.
That was the
And
first
there's
wave.
fewer jobs that are available, fewer people are going out and spending their money, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was definitely, especially in the 1990s, there was a significant correlation there. So I remember the time that I was on the board at the Backdoor Mission, so one of the people who founded that, it started as a ministry out of the back door of Simcoe Street United Church back in the late 1990s. And I remember David Moore, who was the minister there until he retired several years back. I remember him describing that time when they started the mission as a very, very simple, way of, it was a basic drop-in, very, very simple operation, and drop-in coffee, that sort of thing. And I remember him describing the change that was going on, the change that they were observing, the need that they were responding to. It was, as GM was starting its first major phase of incremental, a decrease of its footprint.
Sure.
That it wasn't that they were planning on closing. They weren't doing anything rapidly, but it was happening in these phases over a couple of decades, in fact. But the 1990s was the time when they started to notice that shift in who was down and out. What was the demographic that, and it tended to be some of the ones at the sort of the lower rungs of the working class that they were noticing.
Well, and and I'm hesitant to say GM scaling down or GM leaving, they are still here. But I think it's a significant part of the problem because that was the company that in many ways built the city, right? And now you kind of wonder, what is the driver of the local economy here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the shift that's happened over the last 2 decades in, sometimes in leaps, sometimes in baby steps. We've moved a lot towards, obviously, post-secondary, healthcare. Now we see, that there's some elements of tech. There's, if you were to actually do a full profile of Oshawa's economy now compared to before, it's far more diverse than it used to be. But yeah, the manufacturing in particular, General Motors, I think at one point, turn of the 1990s, between GM and feeder plants, 30,000 people or something. And that was, it was when I was a kid. We moved here in 1989. And I still remember I think the population around that time was 120,000 or something like that. Now, not all those employees lived in Oshawa, but it does give you an idea of just how massive it was in terms of the total population. And, and that was always a vulnerability, to have that super concentration of a particular employer and sector. It was always a risk exposure for the local economy, right? And, I think that the one saving grace over the years is that nothing happened quickly and in, large quantity all at once. It's always sort of been these incremental changes. Not to say that I'm, expressing any, gratitude for that scaling down, but just in terms of reflecting on what was that kind of macro level impact. It
could have been really apocalyptic if it was just, okay, no, everything's shut down 100%. Today.
Yeah.
Right?
That would have been a very different narrative for Oshawa.
Right. But so what role would you say that now the entertainment industry in downtown plays? Because it's sort of all of the biggest businesses here are venues, Tribute Community Center, right? There's a lot of that going on.
100%. This is an industry that's near and dear to me, of course, because I worked in it for many years. I guess technically I still do, although it's a fraction of what I used to do. I used to play 150 shows a year whenever I was working in the industry. And it's... I think that downtown Oshawa has always had, and I would say Oshawa as a whole has always had a strong music culture. I mean, we can trace that back to, the glory days of the Jubilee Pavilion in the 1950s, 60s, whenever they were getting, significant touring acts that would come down there. But yeah, downtown Oshawa, I think, is... it's going to continue to be that. I think that what we have to figure out now is how to put on the government hat, to put on the municipal government hat. It's to figure out how do we best support that? How do we best create the type of ecosystem that will make sure that can continue to be important and to make sure that it thrives, because it is always a precarious industry. I mean, there are venues in Toronto that you would think would have been immune to things going wrong or the place closing, and things happen. Yeah. Great venues that no longer exist in a city like Toronto, which is one of the entertainment and arts and culture capitals of North America, right? So I think we should take nothing for granted, that's right. For sure.
Well, I think there's just this irresistible pressure when you're thinking about putting up a condo and you look at this tiny little dive bar, Sneaky D's.
Yeah.
Knock it over and I'll get $15 million a month.
Yeah.
Like, no. But yeah, I don't know. Well, so I guess changing gears, but staying in the same thing here. Like, what role do you think convergence plays in this kind of thing? Or like Cars on King, or like the street festivals we're doing?
I love those. I think that if you ever want to consider a counter narrative to what we sometimes hear, that nobody wants to go downtown, and I'll say, maybe I should show you a picture of Cars on King or Convergence or many of the other events that happen on the regular. I think that what we're confusing there whenever we're talking about, no one wants to go downtown, and then at the opposite end of the spectrum, here's pictures of thousands and thousands of people. I think that people will come downtown if you give them a great reason to.
Right.
And so that part of it isn't rocket science. Then you want to get into some of those tangibles and intangibles that get into like sustainability and getting more out of that possibility. And if we look closely at what the biggest successes are, and by successes, I'm going to measure it in part by draw. How many human bodies are there down here? So Cars on King, Convergence, what was that? Boo Bash, they added that one, the Halloween event.
Shout out to Lasha.
Yeah, so I mean, there's great work going on in terms of some of these types of events, and besides the magnetism, because we got these venues downtown that are of different sizes that obviously, with the right magnetism, the right act, or the right event, draw hundreds, thousands of people down. So magnetism is one piece of it, but also looking at some of the street festivals in particular, I think that the thing that we sometimes forget or we overlook is that we did something very radical whenever those events have been set up, when those events happen. We shut the street down. And there is something also that is magnetic for the human, the pedestrian, whenever they are in these environments that feel natural to them. When you're walking down King Street on a normal day, especially if it's during busier traffic times, you're walking down this street where you've got motor vehicles blowing by you, anywhere from, a meter to 5 meters away from you. That's not exactly an inviting environment. And you don't think to yourself, wow, I'm really feeling relaxed and great and strolling along. I got to make sure I just come back even if there isn't an event. And if you look at every city around the world, including cities in Ontario, that have managed to enliven parts of their urban core, one of the key ingredients is they say, do we need to reframe who and what moves through these spaces and maybe make changes to that? Great example in Toronto is the Distillery District. It's a major destination. It's pedestrianized. What we have are these great big one-way streets that kind of make it feel like you're walking beside a highway.
Yeah.
But if you shut those streets down and put an event on, people show up in droves.
Right. But the traffic is a disaster for the next 6 hours.
Yeah, it is. And, it takes getting used to whenever you do those types of events and make those sorts of changes, and maybe the answer isn't, to completely shut the street down, permanently, but maybe part of the answer is to think about how do we look at motor vehicle traffic and recalibrate it a bit. Yeah. So it might be about the speeds that they're going. It might be the directions that they're traveling. It might be the volumes that they're moving through the downtown, and try and really think about what makes an urban neighborhood a great urban neighborhood. And could we just do some recalibration on that might change that dynamic?
Well, the thing I would point to here is Victoria Street with the aftermarket.
Great
which
addition.
Presumably was a street at some point, not since I've lived here,
Yeah.
but like, because it is just a pedestrian walkway, and we're doing events there now, which is a really great thing to see.
100%.
Right? I mean, is there a world where other, like those side streets that just connect King and Bond could be shut down?
I think those are the types of ideas we need to look at.
Right.
And, you know, I think the other important thing, I will say this, and this is maybe where I've diverged somewhat from some of the priorities with other council members, but, you know, sometimes we're good at coming up with the capital project, you know, the new thing, the new stage, the new space. But then you got to look at your operating budget and the money that you put in to program those spaces. So it's sort of similar with something like Victoria Street. And I do vaguely remember when it was open for motor vehicle traffic, but they made that change. I'm going to say it was about just under 2 decades ago. I'd have to dig around. I don't remember exactly when that happened, but that's a great example of concept is great. What else do we need to do with it now that we've done it?
Right. Because for the last 8 years, I wouldn't say there's nothing, right? They do the blues festival out there. Sometimes the university uses it, but like not very many events happen.
Odds and ends,
space,
so to speak.
Right? Yeah.
And now they're trying out something that's consistent and also predictable so that people, you know, if you do something once, sometimes people didn't hear about it.
Yeah, and you missed it, right?
Now there's a pattern that's in place that is doing two things. It gives people the pattern to then start to come out regularly, tell other people about it. Maybe you missed this week, but you can get out next week. But it also helps to get people rethinking what these spaces can actually be.
And what's really great with the aftermarket is that it's networking with local businesses, right? So every single business that opens a booth there is now advertising the whole event.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just a good way of making sure people are aware that this is a thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I hope we can see that one thrive. I think that would be a great, especially, you know, a great warm weather Saturday evening option for people.
And it's a live music thing.
Yeah.
You can get a beer out there. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, let's change gears for one last thing. This new town square we've got opened up, the Veterans Square, as it's called. So right after this, we're both going over there. Probably, it's raining.
Yeah,
we're just gonna see if it's open.
See what the weather's like. Yeah.
But can you talk about what are we planning on doing with that space?
So I think that's another one similar to something I said a minute ago. We found the money to do the work, set the space up. And, you know, I think that now that the green is starting to, pop with some of those new plants there, it's starting to look nice and hopefully, helping to quell a bit of the naysaying around it. Because initially it just looked like, concrete, and it takes time to fill these things in.
Sure.
But it's got a cool stage there. So I am hoping that we don't miss the opportunity. We found the money to build it. Now let's not miss the opportunity to program it.
Right.
And that can be a combination of things. That can be a combination of, city-run events where the city is paying for the event, the performers, et cetera. And it can also be something where you find the right partners to come in and do some things there as well too. I think it can certainly be both. But we're going to have to think really clearly about what do we want to do with the space now that it's there. I will say this, and this is a hill that I will die on, as they say. I sure do think that it looks a whole lot better than a poorly maintained gravel parking lot. Yeah. I mean, I know there's always, again, that conversation around parking and perceived scarcity of parking, but it didn't look great for a lot of years, right on a major intersection, major corner. So I definitely think it is loads better in terms of the look.
Right. No, I mean, in the conversations I'm having with kind of locals, the complaint was in the early stages. I don't know so much now, but this would be a very attractive place for maybe an unhoused person to settle down for the night. Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's attracting the wrong type of crowd, right? Since it's been open, that hasn't been the problem, but I think there's a perception there.
Right.
And if you have regular events, then that's not going to be an issue at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it helps when there's feet on the streets, as they say, right?
Well, and like that's when you have Convergence or Cars on King, the thing that I always notice is like that crowd seems to have vanished.
Yeah, and maybe some of it is just that they're in the background somewhere, but there's just more people, you know, and maybe some move elsewhere for the day, but yeah, I mean, I think that's always going to be as long as we have this crisis going on, anything that we do in that city center is going to invite that conversation around, well, who is going to actually use
I think it's
who's
cynical to
actually
dwell
gonna
on
be in,
it, but like it's something that you need to mention.
No,
at
absolutely.
least,
And,
right?
I think that yeah, absolutely, that's a possibility. There is a possibility that homeless people or people dealing with mental health, with addictions, may spend time in that park. Or urban square is probably the better term for it, because I think park creates some confusion. People were expecting more grass or something like that, but it is an urban square.
Okay.
So I think that it just goes back to, that we both can have new things and nice things, and we need to put in that work and those resources to solve these problems that have become systemic, but that do have solutions. And then we can move on to other conversations around, things that, the wants and the nice to haves, and we don't get bogged down in that conversation around, well, what about homeless people? It means that we can do both at the same time, I think.
All right. Well, let's close it there. Derek, do you have anything else you want to say to the camera while we're here?
Anything else to say? I don't know. So many things to say. I thank you. I'm really glad we could have this chat. It was a real pleasure, and I think Oshawa has loads and loads of potential, and I think that's one piece of why I love it so much. We have so much character. We have so much history. We have so much. It's a city that has history and that has a true narrative to it. Not everywhere can say that to the degree that we can, and I want us to keep enriching that narrative and really drive hard towards that potential.
I love it.
Cool.
Thank you for being here today, Derek.
Pleasure. Thank you.